Welcome back. We're unpacking the results of the recent New Brunswick provincial election. They have a new premier, Susan Holt, first ever female premier for that province. And joining me again is JP Lewis. Professor Lewis, again, you're professor of political science at the University of New Brunswick. Thank you again for joining us. Let's talk about the climate surrounding the Conservative Party provincially. This is the Blaine Higgs's party. He's an incumbent premier. One would think that would be an advantage going into this election. What were some of the issues surrounding his premiership? You kind of touched upon perhaps there was a slightly more, not authoritarian, but a more narrow-minded style, or you were alluding to something before commercial.
Yeah, I think that, if you look at his path to becoming premier, he had worked as an executive in Irving Oil his whole life, and then he had dabbled in politics back in the 90s, but he was Minister of Finance under David Alward, who was 2 premiers ago. And then he held on to a seat. And then, notably when he won the leadership, I think he was only endorsed by one sitting member of caucus. So this is a few years before forming government. So even there, like, he was always a bit of a lone wolf. I think that was part of his brand as well that may have appealed to folks. Like, he could have been retired. He'd had a successful career and he was back, his case being like trying to help the province. And I think because maybe he didn't have that personal pressure of a life in politics ahead of him, that he could kind of beat to his own drum. Mm-hmm. And he did. If we look back, so some of it wasn't things that we might think would be classically, when people complain about saving the prime minister, not listening to anyone. New Brunswick was the only province during the start of the pandemic where the government invited other party leaders into a sworn-in cabinet committee to work on COVID-19 decisions. So there we saw collaboration with other parties. He had, and some of your viewers might recognize his name because he's trying to start a new federal party. Dominic Carty was in his cabinet for a number of years. And he said a lot of things publicly that kind of went against what the government was doing. And Higgs put up with it until he didn't. Right. And even if anyone's familiar with his style and interviews, he thinks out loud a lot. And so anyways, I think that, he, by many accounts, he had a my way or the highway attitude behind closed doors. And to some people they just didn't want to be part of that style.
Well, it's always interesting to see someone coming from the private sector who, has been successful, and yet they're entering this arena of politics. And to your point, it's a whole different animal. And, if you have a caucus, you have to be building the team, and you need to have allies and make sure, because the knives are always out, right? So you got to be ready and kind of keep the, all the friendships very, very tight. But it's on one hand, of course, it's refreshing because, his skin in the game is making the province better. He doesn't care about the money. It's not about power. It's not about position. But in turn, you need all of those relationships to help make sure you can execute your agenda.
Yeah, and it really, you'd asked earlier about what the future of this party is. It really sets up a lot of questions around where this party heads. There's folks who had left cabinet who seem to be positioning themselves to make a run. Danielle Lands, a former MLA from the Moncton area. So again, for folks outside of New Brunswick, the Progressive Conservatives do not do well in the northern Francophone part of the province.
Correct.
So if they could have any type of outreach there and breakthrough there, that would be transformative for them. Also in that caucus, who won his seat was Chris Austin, who with another MLA from the People's Alliance Party. So this was a smaller party, a bit to the right of the Progressive Conservatives, who they crossed the floor and joined the Progressive Conservatives a couple of years ago, and Austin was in Higgs's cabinet. So if you have someone like Chris Austin running for the leadership, it's easy to imagine him taking the party maybe in the same direction that Higgs was, which in the days after the election, some people are blaming for the loss, that maybe there could have been a win if the party would have stuck to a more moderate path. And as you mentioned earlier, conservatives in Atlantic Canada are a different animal than we might think about them in other parts of the country. So that the leadership will tell us that, the leadership race.
Yeah, for certain it will be interesting to watch how that unfolds. So just correct me if I'm wrong. Has Blaine Higgs said that he's resigning now? Is he stepping down as leader?
He hasn't, but
Okay.
he lost
It's
his seat.
expected.
And yeah, in the like the headquarters on election night, he basically said as much. So it
Right.
would be shocking if he stuck around.
So the Conservatives will be heading into a leadership in the coming future. We'll have to keep our eye on that. But we're going to unpack more of this, especially as we delve into the policies that really won or lost the election for certain individuals. We'll be right back in just a few moments.